When I was 25 and a half, I started a podcast. The goal? To review some of the newest and latest movies, along with some other stuff. With the help of my guests, I was able to do this, but there were dark forces tampering with my podcast, and with me. They called it an improvised podcast for some reason. I eventually found help in the form of myself. Yes, the me from a universe where the movies I reviewed got delayed. Apparently, my podcast made it to his universe. I know now that it is my duty, for the good of that universe, nay, the multiverse, to keep recapping and reviewing these movies, to hold listeners over until they could eventually see the movies as they were made in their world. For some reason, they come out differently in my world, but it's kind of entertaining that way. My name is Steven Schinder, and this is Delayed Replay. Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Delayed Replay, that podcast where we recap and review movies that came out on time in our universe because they got delayed in that other universe. I'm your host, as always, Steven Schinder, and joining me once again, you may have heard him in previous episodes. He is from the IPC podcast over on Fandom Empire. It is Zach Arnold. How are you?
Hey man, I'm great and I'm excited to be here. This particular topic tonight is one that's very near and dear to me, and so I'm excited to be back and I'm excited to be talking about this particular film from this particular franchise. Obviously, had a lot of fun talking Jurassic World Dominion, and then we've talked New Mutants and Space Jam and all kinds of other stuff previously, and so I'm excited to be back for more fun. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And the topic for this episode is the fifth Indiana Jones movie, which, as we all know, is called Indiana Jones and the Lost City of Gold. Um, I thought this was a rather funny title for them, especially after like Dora and the Lost City of Gold or whatever it was called.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's funny because like that was distributed by Paramount, I think, and the Indiana Jones movies used to be distributed by Paramount, but now now this one's distributed by Disney, and I guess they just stuck to their guns with this title.
Well, what's interesting is I believe back when Lucasfilm was applying for patents and names for Crystal Skull back in like 2007, one of the other titles that they were applying for in order to throw off the fans was Lost City of Gold. So they're kind of taking something that they may have already been working on, something that they may have already been developing, and they actually turned it into something pretty constructive. I was surprised to see them kind of make a return to South America, considering what they did with Crystal Skull, but there's a lot of rich history involved in South America, and I feel like it's appropriate considering how much attention they gave to the Nazis in the first couple of films, that now they're giving attention to some other areas and some other villain characters, I suppose. And it seems to make sense to me that you're gonna kind of direct the attention to places like this, and so it flowed very naturally for me. I was concerned at first, but it ended up being a pretty good choice in my opinion.
Yeah, it kind of makes the fourth and fifth movie feel a bit more connected, like, I
Right.
guess, kind of geographically, which is nice to have because you have like a large gap between four and five, not as big as the one between three and four, but still, it's nice to have that connective tissue. But before we go into this fifth movie, I guess we should like take a step back and talk about our experiences with the franchise before seeing this one. So, how did you get into Indiana Jones, Zach?
Well, it's funny. My first experience with Indiana Jones was not Raiders of the Lost Ark. It was actually The Last Crusade.
Oh, wow.
I was visiting a friend of mine. I hung out with him once a week on the regular, every Wednesday, I believe. And when I got there, he was already watching it. He had already started it before I arrived because I guess he forgot I was coming over or something. I don't know. And what I ended up seeing was the final scene at the cave, where he's solving the clues as they're unfolding and dodging and ducking the different booby traps that are being laid out before him, all the way to the goblet at the very end of the cavern. And then I see him and his dad ride off into the sunset, all that good stuff. And I was like, man, that was pretty cool. What was that? And he goes, Indiana Jones. He didn't say Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. He just said Indiana Jones. And I was like, I gotta watch this. So I'm like 10, all right? And I'm asking my dad, hey, can we watch Indiana Jones? And my dad's like, yeah, sure. So we watch Raiders of the Lost Ark. And all the while, I'm sitting here watching this movie, waiting for this cave sequence where he meets this really old knight and drinks out of this tiny little cup. And the whole freaking movie goes by, and that scene doesn't happen. And I'm like, wait a second, what the heck did I just watch? This wasn't Indiana Jones. And he's like, yeah, it was. It's Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I'm like, well, what about this scene and this scene and that happens? And he's like, oh, that's another movie. And I'm like, there's more? So yeah, I kind of watched them out of order, but it didn't really affect my enjoyment of it any less. Like, I still really, really enjoyed Raiders. I was just kind of perplexed as to why it didn't have that scene. But then it gave me reason to watch the rest of the films. And with the exception of probably not enjoying Crystal Skull as much as the other three, which I think is pretty normal for most indie fans, outside of that, I feel like I had a pretty traditional upbringing on the franchise. Just really enjoyed Star Wars, really enjoyed Harrison Ford and action films, and all of those things were just kind of put together in a neat little bundle with the Indiana Jones character.
Yeah, the movies, especially the original ones, are pretty episodic, kind of like some of those old serials, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of doesn't really matter what order you watch them in. I mean, like, heck, Temple of Doom takes place a year before Raiders, but that's the only prequel-y thing about it. Like, there's nothing about it that makes it feel like a prequel, like lots of prequels we've seen the last few decades have felt. Like, it's
Right.
the least prequel feeling prequel. It's weird. The way I got into it, like, my older brother and my dad were familiar with it, but I was probably really little when they watched it. It wasn't until maybe, I want to say 2006, probably 2007, when we like rented, like me and my brother rented the Indiana Jones movies from Hollywood Video when that was still a thing.
Oh,
And
man, that's a deep cut.
yeah, that's a throwback. So yeah, I watched Raiders, and then Temple of Doom and Last Crusade, the release order, and I really enjoyed them. It was like, because growing up, I was more familiar with the Goonies, and I guess that is more of like a kid, like Indiana Jones, but with kids. So watching the Indiana Jones movies, I guess I was like, oh, cool, this is like the Goonies, but with adults. And yeah, I really enjoyed those movies. And okay, I just remembered. So my first Indiana Jones experience that I remember was probably the ride over at, I think it's at Disneyland. Do you know the Indiana Jones ride?
I do know that one. It's one of the more immersive rides at the park, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's with the lava, right?
Yeah, I think there's some kind of lava involved. I think they throw in a boulder now too, and there's like a couple of like spirits that chase you around the track and stuff. Like they throw a whole bunch of it on there just to add to the fear factor and stretch out the ride, make it a little bit longer, make it worth the wait.
Yeah, I remember like you see the boulder coming toward you, and it's like, oh my gosh, is it gonna hit us? And then you like go under it. And yeah, like my first time going to Disneyland was like 2002, and then I went again 2005. So it was like either of those times could have been like my first time on that ride, and it was so thrilling.
My first time was 2015 because I grew up in Texas and didn't make my way out there until way later in life. But it was still really fun because I went with a buddy of mine, Chris from 1138, and he let me crash on his couch, and we went out there when Disney was celebrating its 60th anniversary. And so it was jam-packed with people. And everywhere that had a single writer's line, we tried to take it. And Indy was one of those that had a single writer's line. And I remember thinking, this is for single writers? I don't want to be in line when you're trying to sit together, because the line for single writers was about as long as regular lines at the Six Flags theme park over here by my house. And I was like, "Jeez, Louise." So many people at Disney celebrating that weekend. It was a great experience, but it's one that I would not repeat. Not a crowd person. I put up with the crowds because it was vacation, it was the experience, yada yada. But I would not do that on the regular. Sorry.
Right, that's fair. And then in 2008, I saw Kingdom of the Crystal Skull in the theater with my brother and our dad, and I remember actually enjoying it. And, like, my opinion of it has kind of decreased a little over the years, but I still actually like it more than Temple of Doom. Just like Temple of Doom feels like really weird to me. Like it's like they're trying to inject these horror elements into the movie that don't quite work. And also I get really tired of hearing Willie screaming and like all this these like moments are like supposed to like gross you out, and it's like they're trying too hard with it. So I'm like in the minority camp. Like there are other people who have said this that like prefer Kingdom over Temple, but pretty much like up above those, I'd put Raiders and then Last Crusade at the top. But I remember in middle school, like going to the school counselor to talk about something, and he had like an Indiana Jones poster in his office. I can't remember which movie it was, but it might have been Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and I said, "Oh, I love that one," and I probably told him it's my favorite, and he was like, "Really? I thought the one with his dad was very good." And now it's like, later on, like when I'm older, I'm like, "Yeah, Last Crusade is the best one." Like I was tripping back then. Yeah.
Crusade is really great, but I think there's also something classic about Raiders. There's just something about it that like it resonates with me, and I don't really have any tangible way to explain why it does, but I'm with you about Temple of Doom. I think like Temple of Doom and Crystal Skull are like battling back and forth for that last spot for me, just personally. It takes a lot to get me to actually watch Temple of Doom. And since my girlfriend isn't a big fan of the indie franchise, I don't really have a lot of incentive to rewatch it at this present time. So, I'm glad that I got to see City of Gold with my buddy Mondo, but I just don't have much incentive for rewatches right now, which is a bummer for The Last Crusade, but it's no love lost for Temple of Doom.
Right. I mean, you and Ben over at IPC reviewed Raiders for its 40th anniversary last month, right?
We did a Raiders rewatch, and that's how I got my girlfriend to watch it with me that one time. Was we were going to spend the evening together anyways, and I was like, "Hey, I kind of need to watch this for IPC. Are you cool watching it with me? I'll take you out for ice cream or something after." Like I had to bribe her basically, and she's like, "Yeah, okay." And then we went and got ice cream, and she was like, "Yeah, that was the best part of the night." And I was like, "Damn it!"
Dang. But yeah, that was a great discussion you guys had. Like the comment section was lit on the YouTubes.
That was one of our most engaging audiences we've had. I think at one point we actually convinced somebody who hadn't seen Raiders to go and give it a try. So I count that as a win.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think what brings Raiders down for me, like what brings it below Last Crusade for me is probably mainly the cringy stuff that they say about that they incorporate into the backstory of like Indy and Marion's relationship. Whereas Last Crusade is like a really great father-son story that I guess like it can resonate with people, right? Like it can actually be like a really good Father's Day movie. Like there's that scene where Indy goes over the cliff and like his dad thinks that he died. He's like, I never told him, and then Like he sees that he's alive and gives him a big old hug, and it's just such a powerful moment.
It really is. There is a lot to definitely take away from Last Crusade, and I hadn't really considered it as a Father's Day movie, but I have been slowly working to figure out a way to find like a holiday movie for each major holiday. And like obviously my family will watch something like The Patriot for 4th of July and like The Passion of the Christ for Easter, and there's plenty of Christmas movies. And we just recently found a Cinco de Mayo movie, but hadn't really thought of one for Father's Day until now. So I appreciate the tip. I might use that next year.
Yeah, and I know that another friend of mine ended up watching like a few years ago when it was in the theater, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, and he was like, that was actually a poignant movie for Father's Day. He ended up like watching it on Father's Day, not realizing ahead of time how fitting it would kind of be for that.
I have one other small anecdote that is in a similar vein. We've had discussions with my buddy Mondo before. I think he was on for Dominion.
Yeah.
He loves going to the movies, and he wanted to go to a movie one time as a distraction because his father was sick with terminal cancer. And so I was like, well, let's go find something bright and cheery to go watch, something that'll, put a pep in your step and brighten your mood, that kind of thing. So I suggested the most recent Pixar movie. It was still in the theaters. Unfortunately for me, the most recent Pixar movie that was in theaters at the time was a little film called Onward. That movie's all about a disappearing dad, and it's all about, you know, saying things that you never got the opportunity to say, and it's all of these things about like adventures with your dad and also trying to remember your dad and stuff. And I'm just like, son of a gun, because
Dang.
like by the time it was all said and done, he was thinking a lot about his dad, and I was like, well, I guess this is something I need to save for Father's Day. So there's a couple of options, I suppose.
Right. Like I was gonna suggest Logan could also be for Father's Day, but it's also kind of bleak, so I guess it's like depending on your mood. But
I think Finding Nemo possibly.
oh yeah, that could work. And I rewatched Zack Snyder's Justice League on Father's Day in black and white because fathers is like a huge theme in that movie, so it felt really fitting.
You mean like Cyborg's father?
Yeah, like that, and also you get like Superman thinking of like both of his fathers, and Flash with his father being wrongly imprisoned, and he's like trying to like make him proud as a hero. So there's like all sorts of stuff like that.
If only Tamura Morrison had made a cameo to be Aquaman's dad in the film, that would have been cool.
Oh yeah, because like Aquaman says he's gonna see his dad, and yeah. But yeah, getting back to Indiana Jones, did you ever watch the TV show, The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles?
Didn't, but I've seen you talking about it on your social media, and I'm intrigued. Where do you consume that media?
I was rewatching the movies on the 40th anniversary of Raiders. And after that, I was like, you know what? I'm going to start watching Young Indiana Jones Chronicles because I have Paramount Plus, and I looked on there and I was like, oh, wow, it has the show. But here's the thing. When it originally aired 1992 to 1993, the episodes were bookended by these segments where you had an older Indiana Jones who was like 90 something and played by an actor named George Hall. And he has like the eye patch, so it's like he lost an eye at some point, and but we'll get to that. And he would like tell people in like the present day at the time like these stories of like his adventures like as a little kid, like age 9, I think, and then it would shift to when he was like a teenager or a young adult. Because we've seen a teen Indy at the beginning of Last Crusade played by River Phoenix, but here we see Sean Patrick Flannery as like a teen Indy, I guess, after that particular scene. And while he doesn't look as much like Harrison Ford, there is a bit of an evolution. Like, the kid Indy and the teen Indy have like these romances that are really innocent, and then eventually like he gets caught up in stuff that seems a bit more mature, and he even gets involved in World War One, and you see like the horrors of that. And there's even an episode where instead of like the really old Indy, you have Harrison Ford as like Indiana Jones in 1950, sort of like telling the story of like something that happened in Chicago. And so that was really cool. And weirdly, when it was released for home video, maybe VHS, definitely the DVDs, it was re-edited so that it would show all the adventures in chronological order, and you'd have like each one would be 2 episodes stitched together. So each one pretty much feels like a movie, like an hour and a half long. And that's what Paramount Plus has. Although for some reason they don't have the episode where it begins and ends with Harrison Ford. I'm not sure why that is, but it's on YouTube. But like the original aired versions with like the older Indiana Jones, like those aren't really available officially. Like it's the George Lucas thing with the Star Wars special editions again. Like it kind of felt like George Hall was kind of erased, though fortunately there's like an hour-long compilation on YouTube of like all the footage of him and like his daughter in the show and like his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And so like I watched the hour-long compilation, and after watching the entire show as it's presented on Paramount Plus, it was like watching a nice recap of the entire show told by old Indy. Like I do like the re-edited version because it's very linear. You know what takes place when. Kind of like the Clone Wars is best in chronological order.
Right.
But I do also really appreciate the older Indy segments that were on the like original aired versions. So it's a really comforting show. Like it's therapeutic to watch, and like the acting is really great. You even have guest stars like Ian McDiarmid, the Emperor himself, was in an episode. Christopher Lee was in an episode, and you even had Doctor Who actors John Pertwee and Colin Baker. And it's like, yeah, this was a pretty ambitious show. And
ambitious
like
that only lasted like 2 seasons, didn't it?
Something like that. Like it lasted from 1992 to 1993, and the last episode, or at least the last one that as it's presented on Paramount Plus, is like one where Indy gets involved with Hollywood, and it mentions a movie called, I think it's called Foolish Wives, and there's actually that movie in real life featured a silent film actor named Harrison Ford, but in the episode, like Indy meets a director named John Ford, and he's like John Ford says that's not his real name, but he like it's like his show business name, I guess. And he's like, but your name sounds like a car. And I thought that was funny, like with the like Harrison Ford thing. And like John Ford's dad is named Francis Ford, which I guess is a reference to Francis Ford Coppola, whom George Lucas knew. And I think Carrie Fisher even wrote bits. Yeah, it was a huge thing. The show gets a huge rec for me, in case you couldn't tell.
Just a little bit, but it's enough for me to head over to my Paramount Plus account and hit the plus on the My List button, which is a thing now.
Yeah.
For a while, they didn't have a My List option, and now they finally do. So that's getting added to my list, and Quiet Place Part 2 is getting added to my list now.
Yeah, that was a fun one to watch last year.
Apparently it took a while for them to finally get the rights to it or something. I don't know. But
yeah, because Paramount Plus launched in March, but not all of their movies were available right away. But it's like finally they have that movie on there.
yeah, contracts and licensing and all that good stuff, but finally getting around to it. Better late than never, I say.
Right, but speaking of better late than never, I guess we should talk about Indiana Jones and the Lost City of Gold now.
So what'd you think of this 1969 setting for this film?
I saw that pop up on the screen, those captions that show the location or the year or whatever. And I saw it say 1969, and I swear to you, Mondo can attest to this because I was watching this movie with him. I saw that pop up on the screen, and I leaned over to him, and I just very quietly said, "Nice." I couldn't help it. I'm 12. I can't help it. But it's interesting that the difference between 2008 and 2021 is, or yeah, 21. So
Yeah, it's 13 years, and in the movies, it's like been 12 years since Kingdom,
yeah,
so it's pretty close, and it's believable.
yeah. It's a pretty similar difference because it was 57 back in Crystal Skull, and now we're up to 69. So it's fairly fluid in its creation. I really liked the sense of adventure combined with the sense of nostalgia. There's very few films out there that are able to accomplish that. I feel like The Force Awakens may have been a good example of that, something that reminded you of classic
Yeah.
Star Wars, but also reminded you of like the types of adventure that you could go on. And I won't call this movie a soft reboot because it tells its own story, absolutely. But as far as being able to have both adventure and nostalgia rolled into one, um, I think this movie is probably one of the better ones to have done that in the last 5 years or so. Because Force Awakens did it 6 years ago, but with since then, I think this is the best movie to have done both of those in one film.
Well, even more than Jurassic World Dominion.
Minion did do a really good job of that, but I also see that almost like, and I know that there are people who are going to disagree with me on this, but I found Dominion to be a bit like Avengers to a certain degree. You get all of the key components that you needed, assembling all of those different people from different places and helping them all find a way to solve the dinosaur crisis. It felt like the 2012 Avengers film to me a little bit. It did do a good job, but I feel like this one did it slightly better.
Okay, yeah, I can definitely see that. Like, there are these like little continuity nods. Like, Indy does mention that like he and Marion adopted a daughter at some point. And I guess that's supposed to be the daughter we see in Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. But like that stuff doesn't get too much in the way of like this film telling its own story. And like 1969 is an interesting year because it's a year of the moon landing, and also like Indy is pretty much 70, and he's kind of reflecting on like, wow, I've lived a long time and even met a bunch of famous people in all my years. That's really crazy. Like, he says it more eloquently than like how I just said it, because like but yeah, it's I really liked this. It was very like he'd have these like introspective moments, like reflecting on all that he's been through and how the world is changing so fast around him.
Yeah, and it's a double-edged sword for him because he appreciates the advancements that humanity is making, but I think he's also recognizing that maybe his usefulness has a timeline and that time's about to go out, you know? Like, he wants to feel useful, he wants to feel productive. He doesn't want to just be a professor in a studio or in a university. And like he feels like maybe that's all he's good for. I thought it was really interesting when he's just brushing his teeth. Something as simple as taking a toothbrush and putting it to your mouth. And have you ever had those moments
Yeah,
where
the minty freshness.
well, yeah, have you maybe I'm just speaking from personal experience, but there's like this ripple effect of time and space where when you're brushing your teeth, that's like you lose all sense of what's going on around you and you're just focusing on that task, and your mind can either be completely still or it can wander super far away. It's always one or the other for me, where I'm either thinking about nothing but the toothbrush, or I'm thinking about everything but the toothbrush. And they did a really interesting job of like blending those two things, where like the music starts to slow down and you're just hearing the brush along the teeth, and then you're also hearing like some sounds of gunfire and the single pistol fire that he had in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Like it's almost like a use of sound to depict the nostalgia he's experiencing as he's getting cleaned up. And it was a really interesting piece of storytelling for me, because most of the time those flashbacks and those pieces of memory lane are visual components, and they integrated it in an audio format while doing a very, very basic grooming chore. I didn't expect that scene to be as compelling as it was, but like when he finally spit the toothpaste and looked up into the mirror, you could see like his eyes welling up a little bit, and you could see he was almost disappointed by who he'd become now, and that he wished he could still be that Indy that was going on adventures all those years ago.
Yeah, like Harrison Ford really sells it with those eyes. You can tell that like he's aware that he's like getting too old for this stuff, but he still longs for like at least one last adventure. And like he like talks about it
You
with Marion, and
mean
yeah.
you mean a Last Crusade? Uh, that's the one thing that frustrates me is, as great of a title as Lost City of Gold is, I'm just like, he went on his last adventure. He went on his last crusade, and now you just keep milking it for more money. But damn it, you still took my money, so I guess it worked.
Well, I mean, I've long perceived the title The Last Crusade as just like the last of the historical crusades, so to speak, rather than like Indy's last adventure or whatever. But I digress.
I guess. But what's interesting is that the type of history that Indy experiences in those two films after Last Crusade both kind of take place in Central South America, and it's a different type of history. It's not, something biblical like, Jesus's cup of a carpenter or the Ark of the Covenant. It's more native culture. It's more native history. And
Yeah, it's like Mesoamerican, I believe.
yeah, all that did was remind me of the Emperor's New Groove, but yeah, Mesoamerican history. Yeah. Hopefully there weren't any llama discoveries or llamas with red eyes or anything like that. Although that's another
Oh,
movie.
is that Lamageddon?
I would love to discuss that movie with somebody sometime, just so that they also feel like they wasted 70 minutes of their lives.
Yeah, I've been meaning to watch that. I just haven't got around to it, but I know like you're always talking about it.
Talk about what a crap movie it is. Just like their Twitter team is hilarious. I think they've got like a Google alert indicator set up every time somebody actually tweets out the word Lamageddon, and they just like automatically retweet it. So they're just always sharing other people's reactions to Lamageddon and how terrible it is. And one person sarcastically tweeted one time, it's like, I feel like this movie should be watched in all intro to cinema classes. Just 10 out of 10 classic. And I'm like, oh man, I wish if I was teaching intro to cinema, I'd be like, here's what you don't do.
Right.
But I feel like Star Wars and even Indiana Jones to a certain degree, stuff that Harrison Ford's been a part of, are those types of films that you do introduce in intro to cinema because of all that they're able to accomplish. From the music to the action to the storytelling to the acting, even like there's usually a lot to that sort of thing, and I don't feel like this movie's any different. Like from the emotion of the toothbrush scene to some of the action sequences that take place in the final third of the film. Like this is another quasi classic Indiana Jones installment, in my opinion. I felt like everything that I would hope for and expect from an Indiana Jones film, they actually delivered on, and for that, I'm grateful.
Oh yeah. So when he's at the university, like this is where Phoebe Waller-Bridges' character finds him, and she says something like she knows who he is and what he's been through, and she pretty much brings him up to speed on like what she's been researching about like the lost city of gold over in South America, and like how the Mayan calendar might be over there and there might be people after it. And so it's hard for Indy to be convinced to go on the adventure because like he does want to do it, but he's also like not sure if he should. And then like she pretty much like kidnaps him and forces him to go on the adventure, which I thought was an interesting way to like drive the plot, like have him reluctantly go on this adventure.
It was very Jurassic Park 3 in nature. It was very, I really don't want to set foot on this island again, but I guess I will set foot on this island again, even though it's extremely reluctantly. Indy is very, very interested, but also not interested all at the same time. And so, yeah, her character basically coerces him to a certain degree into going on this grand adventure. But I thought it was interesting that like he didn't even have time to call Marion and tell her what was going on. He just up and left. And I know that she didn't get a whole lot of screen time, but I feel like it's more of the same that Marion had to go through, years and years ago when she was younger. Like he just up and left. And here he goes again, decades later, just ups and leaves. So like out of everybody in this franchise, I feel the worst for Marion because she gets abandoned not once but twice by this guy. 3 times, I guess, would be the count now. Gets abandoned by him, and then he returns in Raiders. Basically gets abandoned again, and then she has, their son, and then that would be the second time they're reunited in the 4th film, whatever. And then in this one, he gets coerced into going, essentially kidnapped into going, doesn't get a chance to call her and tell her, and she just sees it as him, wandering off again. Like that woman gets left by this man more times than I can actually count.
Yeah, it's pretty frustrating that happens to her. It kind of feels like the filmmakers weren't sure. Well, like I know James Mangold he's a great director, but it kind of felt like him and the writing team like maybe weren't sure like what to do with her. Like maybe it would kind of get in the way of like all these other characters who are on this adventure.
Right.
But I don't know. Like they also mentioned that Mutt Williams, their son, is like out traveling. Like it's kind of vague, but I guess they didn't know how to like what to do with him either. But at the same time, I guess it's nice to hear that he's off on his own adventures, I guess. But yeah, it really felt like the intention was to make this more of a solo piece. I see what I did there for Indiana Jones and his journey here, and which I mean, you get screen time with all these other characters who show up on the adventure, but by and large, it's a personal story for Indiana Jones.
Yeah, I would agree to that. Like they spent that first third of the movie kind of doing some exposition and like explaining away different things in order to kind of open the door for new characters to go on this adventure with Indy instead of like drudging up the past almost.
Right. Although I did really appreciate there's that brief cameo where like he has dinner with Short Round, except he's not called Short Round anymore. It's his actual name, Wan Lee. And he mentions that like he has a son who makes inventions, and he's like, I'm sure that if I have a grandkid, like that habit will probably rub off on the grandkid. And I'm like, oh, this is a reference to the Goonies because like the actor who played Short Round also played Data in the Goonies, so I thought that was fun.
Oh, that's a nice little nod, a little family lineage kind of little tribute there. I guess I didn't put those two and two together. I didn't grow up on the Goonies, but I did remember that there was that connection between those two characters and that one actor. So I should have put that together, but I didn't. It did feel nice having those types of pieces of respect while also kind of using dialogue to explain away the absence of characters. Although, going back to Mutt really quick, it kind of felt like that whole sequence in the first Avengers movie where Jane Foster just ends up in Europe randomly.
Oh yeah.
It's like here's a picture of Natalie Portman. We couldn't actually get Natalie Portman on the movie, but Natalie Portman's not going to be in New York, so Natalie Portman is safe, even though you're not actually seeing Natalie Portman. Like it felt so obvious. It was like, okay. And ironically, they're bringing her back for the next Thor movie, so they must have worked out their differences or just decided to give her a big enough paycheck. But
Yeah,
like,
because I wasn't expecting her return after like Ragnarok basically like wrote her out like in a flimsy way, I would say. But now like I'm actually really excited to see how they utilize her in Love and Thunder.
it'll be interesting to see for sure. I'm not trying to detract from the conversation too much, but like that's kind of what Mutt's write-off felt like to me was even though you get a dinner with Juan, for the most part, the second, the final 2/3 of the movie is just more about, Indy versus Mads Mikkelsen with Phoebe Waller-Bridge along for the ride, and then some other characters I'd never heard of many of them before. Maybe you can help me out. But like the end credits gave some respects to people like Boyd Holbrook and Shawnette Renee Wilson. Like there were some people that I didn't really know or recognize, and they ended up having a role to play as well. So
Right.
it
So you probably didn't recognize them because it's been such a long while, but Thomas Kretzmann played Baron von Strucker in The Winter Soldier and Age of Ultron, and Boyd Holbrook played Donald Pierce in Logan. Shawnette Renee Wilson played Dora Milaje in Black Panther. And Toby Jones is the guy who was in Captain America, the first Avenger. You know, he was a Hydra agent.
he's the Hydra agent,
Yeah,
and
Arnim Zola, that was his name.
Zola. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he was in Fallen Kingdom as well.
Right, like Toby Jones is instantly recognizable, but a couple of the others, I was like, I had to like look them up later, and I'm like, oh yeah, they were those people. So definitely heavy on the Marvel actors in this one. I mean, Mads Mikkelsen played Caecilius in Doctor Strange, but yeah, you have like some really good talent in this, and Phoebe Waller-Bridge's character is called Ellie. I guess that's supposed to be like a reference to her character L3 in Solo, which I mean, sure. I mean, Lucasfilm loves going for the obvious connections, I guess.
And then sometimes they'll beat you over the head with it like that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But what's funny is I remembered interviews with Waller-Bridge when she was getting ready for Solo, and she really hadn't seen much or known much about the Star Wars franchise until she started getting involved with Solo. But if I recall correctly from a different interview, she actually did have a history with the Indiana Jones franchise, like a childhood history. And so to be a part of this franchise was like a really big feather in her acting cap. And I think the effort that she put into playing the role of Ellie was kind of evidence of just how excited she was to be part of this franchise.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like I think it's cool that she's described as an expert navigator, but then you have like that sequence where they get lost on the way to the lost city of gold, which I thought was funny.
I mean, everybody has their off days, I suppose, but I can't help but wonder if navigator meant like a pilot navigator or a boat navigator, and being
Right, because there was that scene where they were on the sailboat, and so yeah, she's at least a sailboat navigator, I guess.
yeah, she's got some sailor blood in her for sure. Um, but as far as being able to make it through the trenches and going through dense forests and stuff, maybe not quite as knowledgeable, but it makes for a lot of fun because when you get lost in a place like that, I mean, it's literally called Lost City of Gold. When you get lost looking for the Lost City of Gold, it just becomes authentic, where you're going off the beaten trail, you're not really living off of a trail or even living off of your rations to a certain degree. Like, they do a time lapse and it looks like it could be several days later, and they're basically trying to live off of the land, and all they're finding is the fruits of the area, and it's just barely enough to give them the energy to keep going. And I thought it reminded me a lot of Raiders, the opening scene in Raiders. uh,
Yeah.
just how dense, and how basically when you turned around everything started looking the same. And so if you're going to make a character go lost in a movie, I'd say do it right, and I feel like they did it right.
Yeah, and you even have that moment where like Indy finds a fruit, but like a snake is wrapped around it, and so he's contemplating whether to even try going for it. And then Ellie like goes up to it and picks up the snake, tosses it away, and like hands him the fruit. And he's like, I'm not sure how hungry I am. And she's like, we're gonna die if we don't eat. And so like he has to like reluctantly like peel the fruit and eat its insides.
His ever reluctance to avoid snakes at all costs. Like, in that instance, it's kind of a trope, it's kind of a joke, but like, I think there was one scene when they're approaching, some abandoned caverns that, eventually we find out have a map that leads to the lost city. But as they're going into these caverns, obviously dark and musty and all that sort of stuff, a haven for our little scurrying, slithering friends, and they were no friends to Indy, I'll tell you that. His hesitance is just really good for continuity, showcasing that this is a part of who Indy is, and even after decades, that part of him still hasn't changed.
And so it's in this cavern that this is where they find Shawnette Renee Wilson's character, who's like been lost there for a while, and like she's also been looking for the lost city, but she's not like on the side of the villains. And like her character's name is, she's also named Dora in this, weirdly enough, and it's really weird having that, knowing like her Black Panther character and like the Dora the Explorer thing. But I guess they just really went for it. And she talks about how like there's actually something in this cavern that can like lead them out and help them find the way to the city of gold. And she says it's like this scope type of thing, but the catch is that when you like look into it, it'll show you the way, but at a price. Like it'll end up like damaging whatever eye you use it on. And so like Indy has to like make this sacrifice, and he like just puts it over his right eye and guides the way out as like he's in agonizing pain. And I thought this was like a really nice tie-in to like those old Indy segments where you see him with the eye patch. It's like it's kind of cheesy that they explain it in this way, kind of like how X-Men Apocalypse, like as much as I enjoyed stuff in that movie, it is kind of cheesy how they explain how Professor X becomes bald. But at the same time, I did appreciate that little continuity tie-in.
Yeah, I love keeping with continuity, and I thought it was cool actually, because even though I hadn't seen, pardon the pun, even though I hadn't seen the Young Indiana Jones stories, or been able to see much of those interludes, I feel like it was just good for this particular movie anyways, even if it wasn't building that type of connection, to help you recognize that there's a cost. There's a consequence to being the hero, to saving the day or whatever. And it's a consequence that Indy is going to have to live with even after the adventure's over. And that's a tough responsibility to carry, and I feel like Harrison, embraced that scene and kind of like leaned into it a little bit, um, because he played the tough guy, but was still letting out screams of pain, acknowledging that, what he did, there was a cost to it, and that cost was part of his vision. So I thought that was pretty well done.
Yeah, so with his eye burned out and like a scar over it, like they fashioned an eye patch for him, and it looks really cool on Harrison. And I'm reminded of like, how Anakin Skywalker had like that scar over his eye, and you'd have like these legends stories that explain that Asajj Ventress like gave him that scar in a duel. But like if you ask George Lucas, he's like, "Oh, I don't care. He just slipped in a bathtub." And I'm glad that they didn't go with that direction of just like Indy slipping in a bathtub, and that's how he gets his scar over his eye.
Indiana Jones and the need for a geriatric bathtub. I stayed in an Airbnb not too long ago that had one of those walk-in geriatric bathtubs. And
Really?
it was different. It was very different, because I was just trying to have a normal, typical, functional shower. And like those tubs are more narrow, and they have seats, and like they turn on and off differently in order to make the handles like easier to grab a hold of and easier to turn on and off for the older community. And it's probably great for someone 65 plus. It's terrible for someone in their mid 20s just trying to take a damn shower.
Must have been quite the adventure then, that Airbnb.
Hey, like 40 years from now, it'll be an adventure, but right now it wasn't. But Indy's adventure just got even better, I feel like, because when he sacrificed the eye, it also caused like a bit of an earthquake in the cavern and around that mountain region. And thinking back to the days of the Millennium Falcon and how they would kind of tilt the camera and tell the actors to go left and then go right, that type of earthquake, compared to the one that gets activated in this movie, way of showing, I thought it was really great to kind of compare how they used to look and how they were able to make it look in this movie. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, like it was definitely a spectacle, but they did it like in a practical way that felt believable but still looked cool, that earthquake. So when they eventually get to the lost city of gold, they're looking for the Mayan calendar, which, as they've explained throughout the movie, like it somehow got from like, I guess, Guatemala to Colombia because like, the different peoples, and there was like some sort of conflict, I guess. And so it somehow ended up in this city. And like Indy, like is very firm about how like he says the classic thing of like it belongs in a museum, but Mads Mikkelsen's character is, I forget his character's name. I just know him as Mads Mikkelsen like pretty much all the time unless he's playing Hannibal Lecter. But Mads Mikkelsen says it belongs in my museum because like apparently like his agenda is like he has his own collection of rare artifacts, and he has like his own, I guess, museum collection thing that he wants to open up and like make money and stuff. And it kind of reminded me of like, his brother Lars voiced Grand Admiral Thrawn, and Thrawn is like someone who appreciates art and even collects a little, I guess. And so it kind of made me think of that, of how like he's a collector of all these ancient things, and he just like he wants them all for himself just to make a quick buck, basically.
Well, he from the vibe that I got from him, he was also a bit of like a, what do you call it, like a prepper, like somebody who's got the means to be able to prepare for whatever may befall you. You know, you're still in the Cold War at this time, so the mutually assured destruction is still going on. The possibility of World War III is still at your doorstep, and so he's a collector, yes, but I feel like he was also a curator of information about the end times. And the Mayan calendar that was taken from the Guatemala region down to the lost city of gold, like it was, from the research that I did going into the movie, you know, just looking up El Dorado, watching the movie to you know, Road to El Dorado, that sort of thing.
Such
Like,
a great movie.
it's a really great movie, and the witty banter that goes on in that movie really kind of helped me understand the shaping of my sarcasm, honestly.
Of
uh,
course.
but like the distance between the two of them is not all that great. I mean, it's only like 1,200 miles separation between Guatemala and Colombia, which is where the setting was for this search for the lost city of gold. So, you know, they tried to palm it off as, you know, some sort of warring factions over territories, or, you know, somebody stole it from another kind of thing. But I really appreciated the, you know, expertise of not just Indiana Jones the adventurer or the fighter or even the archaeologist, but just Indiana Jones the teacher. You finally do make it to this beautiful, gorgeous city of gold. You know, pillars and piles of gold like what you see in The Hobbit even, you know, and Indy is able to look at it with a keen enough eye and realize there are certain things from other eras and other peoples, and it actually does have some method to the seeming madness, and it's based on, you know, groupings, it's based on eras, it's based on all kinds of historical reasons. And by doing that, he's able to narrow the playing field and be like, okay, this stuff is from this era. This stuff is from the actual Mayans. This isn't part, you know, I mean, not the Mayans. I think it's the Incas that live in that area. I forget their name.
Yeah, it might be.
And he says, you know, this is from the original peoples that built it in the first place. And then this stuff over here is more similar to what you would see from the Mayans. And so you go from dozens of piles of gold to just one pile of gold. And it's that process of elimination like you see in The Last Crusade, where he's finally able to like narrow the playing field and take it all the way down to where that calendar could possibly be. And what's funny is Mickelson's character, as you mentioned, was really more after some of those artifacts, particularly the calendar of the end times. Whereas you're in a place that's full of treasure, you know, a place that could make you rich beyond your wildest dreams. But the one thing that you really, really want, the thing that you really, really need, is the information for when the apocalypse is going to happen. I felt like that was really telling about, you know, the current situation with the Cold War. It was really telling about where people's priorities lie. Like I mentioned, the history involved that Indy was able to kind of piece together and pull apart. Um, that scene had a lot of beauty in it, not just in the physical sense with all the gold and the jewels, but also in the storytelling sense, seeing all of those different pieces of people's characters coming about in just a few short minutes.
Yeah, because in this era, there are still people who have that paranoia about like, oh, could the world end via like some sort of nuclear or nuclear? I forget which one it is, like war, and like could that be the end times? Like, what's the correct interpretation of what the end times will be? And so it makes sense that there would be people who would try to seek out this knowledge, like whatever the cost, see if it ties into what's going on with the current situation is. And I thought that was a really strong theme to play into in this film. But speaking of themes, I really loved the theme that John Williams composed for like when they like enter the lost city of gold, and it's like very beautiful. It's like dun 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 dun. Like it sounds very John Williams, but very grandiose, and like all these other things I can't really do with my mouth right now. But it just felt like such a powerful piece of music, and it's like props once again to John Williams.
Williams is the man, dude. I tell you what, John Williams is the man. Now, I'll admit that a lot of his work, probably most of his work from the Star Wars trilogy, I could kind of take it or leave it. I mean, a lot of it just wasn't super memorable to me. It was like, yeah, this fits for what this scene is trying to do. Yeah, this fits for this part of the story. But there wasn't a whole lot that I found like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And so to have that sense of awe being accompanied with the John Williams score, it was a really great 1-2 punch because there's just a slight hint of vocals going on in the background, and then you have that turning shot. It's almost like a turning pano shot where Indy and his gang are at the mouth of the cavern, and then they finally turn the camera to see what they're seeing, and like you finally realize that you've made it, you've done it, and obviously there's more to be done, but that sense of awe and fascination is something that that does really stand out to me, and that's thanks largely to the film score.
Yeah, it felt very welcome to Jurassic Park, like just the way that it felt, you know?
Definitely see that. I'm biased in the sense that I think that Journey to the Island / Welcome to Jurassic Park is like one of Williams's finest pieces.
Right.
I wouldn't say that this is like, you know, competing for that, but it's probably like a top 10 of Williams's scores. It again captures that sense of nostalgia and adventure all in one. Going back to what I was talking about at the top of the show, it is able to take pieces of the music used in previous films, in previous indie films specifically, and incorporate some of what's trying to be done in this film. So nostalgia and adventure, they do good at both.
Yeah. So when they get to the calendar, obviously, like you have a classic struggle. Like Thomas Kretschmann and Boyd Holbrook do really well with like I don't know if they used like stunt doubles for this or if they did some of it themselves, but it looked very convincing. Like they were like doing all these like fighting moves, and like Mads Mikkelsen was also like a formidable threat, and Phoebe Waller-Bridge and Shawnette Renee Wilson's characters had to do like much of the fighting against them because like Indy is like really old and like has access to only half of his vision now, and so he feels kind of useless. And he's like, there's this moment where he's like crouching down, and it's like he closes his one eye, and you hear audio of like past adventures when he was like on the run, or there are like guns and warfare, and he was like he talks to himself and he's like, no, this is not the end, not yet. And he like gets out his trusty rope because like prior to this point, like he tried to like use, or whip I should say, he had tried to like use it and like would kind of like fail at it because he's been out of practice. But this was a moment where like he really like excelled at it and managed to like contribute to this fight against these villains, and it just felt like a really nice last hurrah for him.
And this is where I feel like Williams was shining more than the discovery of the City of Gold, was the grabbing of the whip. You know, you hear the classic Raiders theme in the background as as he's getting ready to bring it back out and put it into practice. Like, yeah, Ellie and Dora are kind of in the fight of their lives and they need some help. And, Indy has not been able to use the whip very successfully. He's used it once or twice in the movie up to this point, and he doesn't have a whole lot of confidence in it, doesn't have a whole lot of confidence in himself, especially doesn't have a whole lot of confidence now that he's got half of his vision gone, but he realizes he's got to do something. And so he does. And just barely able to succeed in helping them get away, but you hear the dun 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 dun, dun like just very dramatic and drawn out as he's drawing it out of his sack.
Yeah, and as like the choir voices in the background, it's very like epic.
It's very majestic and very apropos for the usage and the purposes that are expected for a fight scene of this caliber, and I thought it was great.
Yeah, of this caliber for the calendar.
Calendar, yeah. Well, whoever possesses it, as the legend was going, whoever possesses it is able to possess the knowledge of when to anticipate the end times. And so anybody that's a prepper, anybody that is, scared of the Cold War, anybody that is seeking protection, not only could Mickelson's character be a curator, but I mean, theoretically, with this type of quote unquote information, he could become a cult leader. And so,
like get his own following,
get his own group that wants to hear the prophecies and that kind of thing. Like, he could probably start his own religion with that calendar. But we all know that Indy's going to be able to find a way to save the day, as he always does. But it definitely comes at cost, in the form of his eye, and it definitely comes with great struggles. So I thought I was satisfied with the resolution. I probably would have preferred if Indy could have actually gotten it back to his museum or a museum or even the university, but it seems to be a trope with Indy's character that he's able to do enough to save the day, but never enough to actually get his artifacts back on display. So it seemed about right.
Yeah, I actually really appreciate that they didn't go the museum route, because like Ellie and Dora talk about how like it needs to go back where it really belongs. And so like after they've defeated these guys, like a couple of them like fall to their deaths, and like Toby Jones and Matt's characters get like arrested by like locals when they get to like a near town or whatever. And so like Indy and the gang like bring the calendar back to like where the Mayan civilization that had it was. And so because they feel like that's its proper place, and they keep it hidden enough, and it's like they put it in this like device that seems to like lock it, so it seems like it'll be safe, like kind of in a vault, which is weird. I wasn't expecting to see that in like this civilization, but I guess for the purposes of this movie, it's a thing, and it's like, okay, I can accept this, I guess.
Well, what's funny is the academic in Indy definitely wanted to find out some of that knowledge before leaving. And what's funny is, the academics that were with him that, took a look at it, kind of the way they were depicting the medallion in the first movie. They say, I can't be sure, but I believe it says the year 2012. And I got a hearty chuckle at that, because, we had that whole 2012 scare with the Mayan calendar a few years back. And again, like you were mentioning, it just kind of brings everything full circle, because obviously we're well past 2012 now, but to make that type of reference in a movie set 40 plus years from 2012, I thought it was pretty clever.
Yeah, it's really funny, like thinking in retrospect about how 2012 was not the end. In fact, like it was a pretty good year considering like the Avengers became like really popular with the general public that year. Um, but yeah, like I really liked this and how, you know, Indy says his goodbyes to like these new characters, and he's like, he doesn't say much, but he just says a few words, and he's like, "This was fun." Like he just, and he says so much in so few words. Like Harrison Ford just
Yep.
did such a great job there.
Yep. I mean, Harrison's always been good at that. I wouldn't be surprised if that wasn't the actual line. You know, like in Empire Strikes Back, it was supposed to be I love you too. But no matter how many times they tried it that way, it didn't come out right. And then they finally just say, you know what, do whatever the hell you want. And he goes with I know. And all of a sudden it's perfect. And so I can't help but feel like there was something else that was meant to be said there, and Harrison himself just paused and went with the word fun. And I bet he was talking about the making of the movie. You know,
Yeah.
he was probably being Harrison Ford there for a minute, and we all just saw him as Indiana Jones. But we all know the history that Harrison's got with this franchise and how much he loves playing the character. It would not surprise me one bit if that line was improvised and they kept it in there to, you know, give a double entendre about how much fun Indy had on this adventure in addition to how much fun Harrison had making the film in the first place.
Oh yeah. It you know what it kind of reminded me of in you know, Star Trek Generations. Like it was fun was all the lines that Kirk says, and that's like the last Star Trek thing that William Shatner did was Star Trek Generations. So I feel like, you know, that gets a mixed reception, but I feel like it definitely landed well here. Like most, like almost everyone, if not everyone, is pretty pleased with like the line delivery here, you know?
Well, and it's freaking Harrison Ford, man. Like he's the king of understatements. He's the king of being able to say the most by using the fewest words. And that's exactly what that line is. So it's perfectly in keeping with Harrison's persona and with Indy's character. I was totally happy with it because it kind of exemplifies what I thought of this film. I thought it was fun, and they did a good job.
Oh yeah. And so he returns home, and like Marion looks super worried because like he only has the one eye, and he, but like he's still smiling, and she's like kind of like confused about that, and he was like, "Don't worry, I see better now. It's all about family." And like he's, I guess after all this, he knows that like he he appreciates what he had already now more than ever. Like he's had his fill, his last adventure, and he's cool just like chilling with the family, and also like letting whatever relatives he has or he's gonna have in the future have their adventures, while he gets to tell like his stories of his old adventures as he grows older. And like I was not like expecting this, but there's like right before the credits, there's like a moment where you see footage from like the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, where it's like some of the Jones family members having dinner on like Thanksgiving in that one episode. And it's like you also have a montage of like different clips from like all the different movies. You see like archive footage of Mutt Williams and other characters like Marcus and Indy's dad, both in the show and in Last Crusade, and like all these characters that we've come to know and love. And I got so emotional seeing this montage, and like just the way John Williams scored it is just like it's the perfect ending for like the franchise, like no matter what you think of like the quality of this adventure as a whole.
Oh man, to be as comprehensive as they were and as thoughtful as they were about, tying up loose ends and whatnot, it feels pretty safe to say that Lost City of Gold will probably be the final installment of this franchise, don't you think? At least as far as Harrison Ford is concerned.
Yeah, because I know Harrison Ford has said he doesn't want anyone else playing Indy, so I don't know if maybe they could make spin-offs based on some of the other characters, maybe, but I think like as it stands, like this like closes the book on like Harrison Ford's Indiana Jones. Like it ties the bow really neatly. And like I know the trend is to like keep on reviving franchises, but I really appreciate this as an ending. Like I don't know like what'll happen if they'll like I want this to be like how Back to the Future is at the moment. Like the trilogy was great and they're doing what they can to make sure that there's not a fourth movie. Like they're trying to like make sure that doesn't happen like as long as they can. So I hope that they at least try that with like Indiana Jones, because this is just such a great ending. And I mean, we forgot to mention off the top of the show that we're recording this on Harrison Ford's birthday. So like, I mean, what a topic to talk about on his birthday.
Right? Happy birthday, sir. You have earned all the praise and acclaim that you have worked so hard to get. And this movie is, in my opinion, a culmination of what's been a fantastic career, not including The Secret Life of Pets #2, which I thought was a waste of
You
but
you thought it was a number 2?
I thought it was a #2. I really did.
Yeah, well, like the premise, like okay, so I didn't like the first movie that much. It, like we all know, is basically a Toy Story ripoff. But the second movie looked like it. I thought it would have potential. I thought it would be more about like the dog protecting the kid, and it would be really cute. But then, like the premise diverged from that a lot, and it was like so frustrating. I was like so disappointed with that second movie because it started off looking like it would show what I might prefer, and then it just didn't.
That's a good way to put it. I thought it was going to show what I wanted it to show, and then it just didn't. And that's the synopsis for a movie from the galaxy far, far away. But I'm not going to get into that discussion tonight.
I knew you were gonna go there, but
you set me up for it. What can I do?
Yeah. Like once I said like what I was saying about Secret Life of Pets too, I was like, oh, is Zach gonna mention that movie? But yeah, I mean, it has mixed reception. We'll just leave it at that. We have things we like about that particular space movie and things that kind of fell short for us. Like it's whatever at this point.
Yeah, but whether we like it or not, the Phantom Menace will always be a part of Star Wars.
Oh, that's what you're talking about?
Got him!
Yeah, I was like, wait, there's no way this is the one he's talking about. I remember hearing him say he really enjoys this movie on IPC.
Oh, I do have my critiques of Phantom Menace, but there are times where I usually end up enjoying Phantom Menace more than that other movie. Not gonna
Yeah,
lie.
I mean, we're referring to The Last Jedi, like it's obvious, but I do like I enjoy all the Star Wars movies to different extents, but I think I prefer Last Jedi just slightly over Phantom Menace. Like it's not by a huge margin. I just think the acting is better overall in Last Jedi, in my opinion. But there are things where like the storyline could have been more refined. Like maybe if Ryan Johnson had a co-writer, like I thought he did well with the Jedi storyline, but maybe someone else should have written the Resistance and like Finn and Rose storyline. But I mean, too late now. Like, what can you do?
It is what it is. There's always speculation, and hindsight's always 20/20. But
Right.
going back to Indy 5, if I may just go ahead and share my final thoughts on it, because
Oh yeah, go ahead.
I'm kind of running out of praise for this film. Like it ties up the loose ends really, really well. It doesn't necessarily apologize for Crystal Skull, but it kind of gives us some relevance to it. It like makes it necessary to a certain extent. It's like, hey, we had this adventure in South America. Now, guess what? We're having another one in South America, and it's not going to be beating you over the head with South America. It's going to be here's the cultural relevance and importance of the history of this region that we've had to use 2 movies for it now. Like, that was kind of the point that was driven home to me. And then, as we mentioned, the acting, the action, the music, the storyline, even the pacing. I never got bored with this movie. It was always intriguing, whether it was, action packed or, dialogue based. Like they struck the balance really well, and they kind of found ways to intertwine this film with other pieces of the franchise, even down to the eye detail that you were mentioning earlier. Um, this is a really, really solid film, and that's why, a few bad jokes aside and a few weird shots that are obviously stunt doubles instead of Harrison Ford performing the stunt. Aside from those things that are like pretty obvious, it's a really solid film, and so I would probably end up giving it 8.5 whips out of 10.
Oh, that's scary. That was the exact same score I was gonna give it. Yeah, yeah, I'm giving it 8.5 fedoras out of 10. And yeah, like I echo those same sentiments. It does such a good job closing the book. It's a thrilling adventure. I don't know how you would rank all 5 movies now, but I think I'd still put this below Last Crusade. Like that one is still my favorite, but this is second, and then Raiders, then Crystal Skull, then Temple of Doom. But yeah, like I was really satisfied with this movie. Like James Mangold and like Lucasfilm and like all the actors, they knocked it out of the park, and it was worth the 13-year wait, because like they've been teasing this 5th movie since Crystal Skull came out, and it's like I'm glad it wasn't a letdown.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I don't know where I would rank it, to be honest. I probably just need to go watch it a couple more times. Oh darn, I'll have to use my A-list subscription and go watch it again.
Yeah, oh darn, you'll have to rewatch a movie you really enjoyed.
Oh, wow, such a sucky life I lead. It's probably top 2, maybe top 3.
I thought you were gonna say top 5, and I was like, there are only 5 Indiana Jones movies.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do like an IPC top 5 episode pretty soon. It's like top 5 Indiana Jones films. But yeah, Temple of Doom still down there at 5. Crystal Skull would probably be a very, very close 4, with like the option for alternating between the two of them. The number 1 for me though is still probably Raiders. There's just something about Raiders that feels timeless to me, and so that 2 to 3 area is where City of Gold and Last Crusade are kind of alternating. I don't want to like disrespect Sean Connery and what he did in that Last Crusade film, but it could end up getting bumped down to number 3. For now, City of Gold is right smack dab in the middle at the 3rd, with Last Crusade at 2, but it's neck and neck for those two, as much as Crystal Skull and Temple of Doom are neck and neck for the bottom position.
Right, that's fair. And yeah, I mean, I feel like we can't say enough good things about Lost City of Gold. Like I do kind of wonder if they could have somehow incorporated some of the other familiar characters. I guess that's why I'm not sure if I'd rank it much higher, but at the same time, I do understand wanting to keep the story more fresh and not rely too much on nostalgia. And I thought it struck a decent balance in that regard.
I would agree to that.
But with all that being said, thanks for joining me on this episode, Zach. Where can people find your stuff?
Oh, dude, this was a blast. Thanks so much again for having me. I am at Zach the Voice on just about every social platform you can think of. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all of those. Snapchat even though I don't use Snapchat all that much. But
MySpace.
I would too young for MySpace. But yeah, all those major platforms, ZACH the Voice. And then, we do IPC episodes on Phantom Empire, but you can find IPC podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find most recent episodes on the Phantom Empire YouTube channel. And I guess keep your eyes and ears open for more football broadcasts in the fall. I may end up being absent from IPC for a couple of months as I'm doing that, but yeah, for the most part, it's Zach the Voice and IPC podcast.
Nice. Yeah, go ahead and check all those out. As for my plugs, you can follow me at Steven Schinder on Instagram and Twitter, Steven Schinder Storytelling on Facebook, where I announce pretty much everything I'm involved with. StevenSchinder.com for details about my book that's been out and hopefully in the near future, the next one. So just keep an eye out. And anything else I'm involved with, I can link in the show notes. Me and my dad finally launched our podcast about the band Yes. We launched with the name Yes Shit, but we're kind of we might be changing the name. Like we'll see what happens, but either way, I'll link it. And yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. And if you'd like to email Delayed Replay with your comments and thoughts about our coverage or just any of these movies in general, or maybe movies we haven't talked about, like, I don't know, what are your thoughts on Corpse Bride? I don't know, just thought the same, whatever movie came to mind first, and that was it. But yeah, go ahead and email delayedreplaypodcast@gmail.com, and we might read your thoughts on the show. And the next episode, we'll see what it ends up being. I know we got one last Jam movie from like the 2000s called Skate Jam, but there's also like these other summer movies. So we'll see what the next one ends up being. But without further delay, have a good day.